Episode 23 of the Interpretation Station is Call to Order. Please be seated. Hello everyone, how's everybody doing? Back to the Interpretation Station tutorials today. Have you been missing them? I know I've been putting out the different stuff lately. Are you enjoying the stuff I'm putting up on LinkedIn? The one-page sheets? Did my first commentary yesterday. Don't know if you saw that one on the Spanish text. So I'm going to be doing a lot more of those, but I've got to keep the old faithful happy, don't I? I've got to keep putting out these tutorials, even though they're hellish to produce. I mean, as I say, it's these are so much more difficult to produce, but I'm going to keep putting them out. Probably going to be doing the tutorials now once every 2 weeks. I think I'm going to be putting out the shorter videos, a lot more of the shorter stuff, like the 10-minute things over the week, and then every 2 weeks you'll get like a proper tutorial. So today's tutorial, we're doing Russian today, but it's a bit of an unusual one. You know, with the Russians, you're always used to, I'm always generally used to doing more of the blood and guts sort of stuff, you know, Security Council things, doing that sort of stuff. I'm so used to that. I'm so used to the set of vocabulary that they use. And the thing is, you get so used to it and so comfortable doing that, it actually comes to you as a bit of a shock when they deliver statements, a statement in a different context. Yes, because today the Russian statement we're going to be looking at was delivered at the UN Summit on Biodiversity. Yep, we're going to be doing an environmental statement by the Russians today, and it's a whole different kettle of fish, you know. So be prepared, be prepared. You're going to be entering this whole new world now of vocabulary to do with different kinds of animals and nature and flora and fauna. You know, none of the stuff that you get in the Conference on Disarmament or in the Security Council, the situation in Syria. This is going to be a completely, this is going to be, as they say on Monty Python, something completely different. Okay, so yeah, Russia and the environment. So it's not an issue that the Russians are particularly proactive in. They have their set position on environmental issues, and they'll sort of set it out when it comes to a big summit or conference. They'll state their position, you know, they'll do all the set piece sort of stuff, but they won't take a particularly proactive role in, I don't know, in formulating any of the resolutions or that sort of thing. They just have their position, and it sort of stops there. Now, the Russian position on climate change and the environment is quite an interesting one. It's not entirely Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment, speaking to the Summit on Biodiversity last year. I'm not going to do a sort of big long intro into the subject. As certain issues, events, conferences are raised during the statement itself, I may do little digressions to just give a bit more background. But so, as you know, before we start looking at the statement, so it's Erin who's providing the recording today. She's a good supporter of the Interpretation Station. She's provided me with a good few statements. Thank you, Erin. What you do, as ever with the Interpretation Station tutorials, the old plan that never fails, the FAPU plan. You go into the description box. You follow the link to the original statement by the minister. You then record yourself rendering his statement. You then print the statement off, the text statement, and then you watch the show and you see what you did right, see what you did wrong, see what new stuff you can learn. And as I say, believe me, you're going to learn some new stuff in this text. This guy learned quite a bit of new stuff from doing this text, so it's a good one. It's a good one. You'll appreciate when you suddenly do get dropped into that environmental meeting and the Russians speak, and they suddenly come out with all these new terms and names of all these animals, you'll be so thankful you watched episode 22 of the Interpretation Station. So, without any further ado, let's move to the academic part of the show. Okay, so if everyone's sitting comfortably, let's get started with the academic part of the show. So as I say, this is a statement by Dmitry Kobilkin, the Russian Minister of Natural Resources and Environment at the UN Summit on Biodiversity in 2020. So here we go.
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues.
Okay, quick thing at the very start. So the General Assembly, it has a president, as Aaron rightly says, President of the General Assembly, sometimes known as the PGA. You can shorten that actually, if you refer to him sort of numerous times. So nothing to do with golf, by the way, not the Professional Golf Association. PGA, President of the General Assembly.
The Russian Federation attaches great importance to the conservation of biodiversity and the sustainable use of its elements.
Okay, interesting thing just to start with, actually. It says the Russian Federation. I've had a lot of people ask me, do you need to say Russian Federation? Can you just say Russia? To be honest, I think it's fine just to say Russia. I don't get the impression the Russians are that hung up on you needing to say the Russian Federation. You can if you want. I think that the Russians tend to be more sticklers for making sure that the substance is conveyed. That's what they're really, and that's what they really want to be certain of. Federation, the airs and graces of that sort of nature, they're not so fussed about. And then she says, attaches great importance for придает большое значение. So there's a few ways to do that. I sometimes say set great store by, highly values. There's a few alternatives. Again, find one that you're comfortable with. Now, this word сохранение, it's going to come up a lot in this text, and it's going to be a bit of a nuisance word. I'm just warning you. So she's gone with conservation of biodiversity. I'm going to come back to that сохранение a bit later on, just so that you can see all the different contexts in which it's used, and then I will draw a very wise conclusion after that. Let's go on.
The implementation of these tasks is the responsibility not just of federal and regional authorities, but also the private sector and civil society.
Just one thing to point out here, that what she's done very nicely is, okay, so несут ответственность. So obviously in the Russian it's active because the subject is going to be the федеральное и региональное правительство. But obviously in Russian you can do that. You can leave the subject till the end of the sentence pretty much. Haven't got that luxury in English. So you'll notice she turns that into is the responsibility of the federal and regional governments. Okay, so there's a classic sort of little Russian to English flip of basically like an active to a passive.
It is important to provide for mechanisms to involve business in projects to protect endangered species, including through public-private partnerships.
So like me, so предусмотреть, her word is provided for, and I tend to find that's the safest thing to go with. That's sort of my go-to word for предусмотреть, provides for. You've got envision, envisage as well, stipulate. Then, okay, вовлечение бизнеса, she's gone with involve business, which is okay. I like to engage with whatever it may be, engage with business. Bring on board is also good if a bit of a mouthful. So involve or engage. Okay, now this expression here, охрана исчезающих видов. Now you can read that on the text and you'll know immediately what it means. But I tell you, so if you're anything like me, so when I did this text and I suddenly heard that, and it's been a while since I've done like a Russian statement on the environment. I couldn't think of what we say exactly in English. It didn't come to me immediately. Now, obviously, it's protection of endangered species, right? But it just shows you, you've always got, mentally, you've got to prepare yourself for certain things like this. If you're not used to the subject matter in a certain language, those words won't always come to your head naturally. You've got to think to yourself, okay, what sort of things are they going to talk about? And this text is full of examples of these expressions and words that we read them in the newspapers all the time, hear them in news all the time, but what we don't often have to do is to put the Russian equivalent into English. So you'll see, I'm sure you'll see what other examples I give you. Государственного частного партнерства, public-private partnerships. And I believe those, sometimes we can call those PPPs, can't we? I think in English, again, if it's mentioned more than once, I think you could start referring to them as PPPs.
It is precisely this vision that lies at the heart of Russia's policies in this field. Ensuring the viability of the biosphere requires efforts to be made by all countries with consideration of their national conditions.
Okay, so with the жизнеспособности биосферы, she's gone with the viability of the biosphere. That's a very good word. That's probably what I would usually go for 90% of the time, for жизнеспособность, viability. In this context, when they're talking about the biosphere, perhaps the vitality of the biosphere might be even better. I think that's really the mot juste in this case. But as I say, viability is a-okay. It's fine. It's good. But I don't know. I'm just giving you that as an alternative, if any, for some point in the future.
In Russia, we focus in particular on developing and enhancing the system for specially protected natural areas, as well as on the preservation and restoration of rare and endangered species of animals and plants.
Okay, there are a few things here I want to point out. Okay, so this sentence starts в Российской Федерации, and it's interesting that Erin has started the sentence with in Russia. Okay, she's gone with the V. Now, I'm always a bit wary of starting when interpreting from Russian. I'm a bit wary of starting sentences with prepositions like za, v, na. I tend to prefer just to put whatever the place or the person concerned is into the subject, and then adapt the sentence as required later on. So I would probably say, в Российской Федерации мы делаем основной акцент. I would probably go with like Russia places special emphasis. Just sometimes if you go with that preposition, it can limit your options a bit later. Now, the thing is, in Russian, you'll often get a sentence construction which starts with like a prepositional phrase, like, for example, в России, and from there, then they'll go with a verb, like создан, okay? And then only later will you actually get the noun, okay? So if you have a sentence like в России создан новые механизмы для blah blah blah, and you go with the in Russia, you hear the sozdan, and you sort of have to wait to hear what the verb's going to be. So you have to, in Russia, mechanisms have been created. I mean, you could say in Russia we've created mechanisms, but that's always a bit risky. It's not 100% certain that it's going to be a we. Whereas if you just turn the Russia into the subject, then you, like with the sentence like в России созданы механизмы, you can just say Russia has created mechanisms. So anyway, the point is I tend to like to just, the first word I hear, I like to tend to put it in the subject and then adapt it as I go along. Okay, делаем основной акцент, I think she says special emphasis. Or again, you could just say here, one of my favorite words is like to prioritize. We prioritize. You get those two words, we prioritize. for 4 Russian words. Мы делаем основной акцент. It's a good bargain, you know, just for those 4 Russian words, you just need to say 2 English. So. Особо охраняемых природных территорий. So you're going to get in this text a lot of these sort of big lumpy constructions that the Russians use, their sort of official terminology for various nature reserves and so on. So again, when I first heard this, I just did, you know, specially protected natural territory. Then I looked it up, and you know, again, it's an official sort of, it's a set phrase, and this is what they call, this is a nature reserve in Russian. This is the sort of bureaucratic jargon just for a nature reserve. And okay, so then we've got the сохранение и восстановление редких. So she's gone with the preservation and restoration, or the protection and restoration of rare and endangered species. I think in English we tend to talk about protecting endangered species. I mean, again, if you say preservation and the restoration, it's okay. It's not. It's everyone's going to understand what you're talking about. Just be aware that, as I say, in English we tend to like talk about protecting endangered species, rare and endangered species. So again, you've got this сохранение. That's the second time it's come up. In this context, you know, the best solution for it is probably protect. Okay, let's move on.
Today, the most valuable natural complexes and sites are protected within 334 federal specially protected natural areas. That is 109 nature reserves, 64 national parks, and 61 wildlife reserves.
Okay, now we're getting a torrent of this sort of these official names of these various sites in Russia. Okay, so she talks природные комплексы. She talks about nature complexes. The Russians do like to use this word complex in a lot of different scenarios, like the industrial complex, the промышленные комплексы, and you can. I mean, it's okay. She's used with the complexes. Probably you have the объекты as well. So not nature sites. Complexes could work, nature reserves perhaps. Then we have, by the way, again, сохраняются в границах, okay. So, like maintained here. The point is, you're going to see in this text that the сохраняется, right, my usual go-to safety word for сохраняется is maintain. Generally tends to work best overall, at least when you're talking about military things and nuclear things and whatever it may be. Now you're going to find, though, in this text that I've looked at all the sort of references to сохраняется. You'll find that the sort of really safety word here for сохраняется is protect. That's the word you really want to be using first if you can't think of anything better. Now in this particular context, like if you're if объекты сохраняются, then they're being maintained. But if it's виды животных or растения that are being сохраняются, then it's protected. It's more often. No. Again, I will be identifying more of these cases as we go along. And then, okay, then we've got all these interesting words now that I'd not come across. Заповедник, заказник. So I had to look them up. Right? So заповедник is apparently a nature reserve. And заказник is a wildlife reserve. Now the point is, all these words are pretty interchangeable, you know, refuge, reserve, shelter, national park. You just need to have a collection of them, a sort of set of them in your head before you start out this meeting, so that you can then just sort of, you know, when you hear the different variations in Russian, you can just drop them in. I mean, it doesn't matter if you get it like 100% like for like. You know, if you say for a заказник that it's a national park, or if it's a shelter or a sanctuary, that's the other one I was going to say, a sanctuary. But as long as you've got those sort of synonyms, a collection of 2 or 3 synonyms, I here for myself have pointed out reserve, sanctuary, and refuge. You can just sort of drop them in where you sort of feel like it to enrich enrich the vocabulary output that you're giving. So the point is just be prepared. Remember, like when you're preparing, just try and anticipate what they're going to be talking about, what's going to be said.
On the whole, the system of specially protected natural areas in Russia includes around 13,000 areas of federal, regional and local significance, with a total area of over 250 million hectares, or over 13% of the area of the Russian Federation.
Okay, so again, the система особо охраняемых природных территорий. It would be so much easier, if you knew it, you could just say that system of nature reserves. Общей площадью, so with an area of, surface area of, if you like. A few useful numbers to try and get. The 13,255 миллионов, etc.
On other forms of territorial protection, which refers to protected areas in accordance with international standards, over 25% of the land area in Russia is legally protected.
Okay, so here I just want to look at the sort of second half of this sentence. So she says that, over 25% of Russia's land area is protected. Because obviously in the Russian it says находится свыше 25% сухопутной территории. Again, this is an opportunity where she could have flipped it, all right? The под законодательной охраной в России, you could, rather than saying having to leave that at the end, saying that the land area is under 25% of the land area is under legal protection, you could say something like, when you hear the законодательной охраны, you could say that the legal protection applies to or covers over 25% of the land area. Again, that's another example of a case where you could have done the famous old Russian to English. In this case, object to subject flip. Turn законодательной охраны into the subject of the sentence. By the way, I guess for сухопутная территория, the mainland as an alternative to land area, I think is maybe more natural sounding in English. Not a big deal though.
A significant contribution by Russia to the achievement of strategic goals in the field of biodiversity, which stipulate that by 2020 at least 17% of the land area must be protected.
Okay, the стратегические цели в области биоразнообразия. That's just basically the SDG. So she's given it the full title, the strategic goal in the field of biodiversity. I mean, you could shorten that without any difficulty to saying the SDG on biodiversity. I think that's quite a well-known one. Согласно которым, this is good how she says which stipulates. So again, she could have said whereby by 2020. She could have said, but there's good how, which stipulates. She turns that SDG into the subject, and then she can finish the sentence quite smoothly, which stipulates that by 2020, at least 17% of the mainland needs to be protected. So that's an example of a very good flip there that Erin's done.
We have set a goal to create by 2024 no less than 24 new specially protected natural areas, a land area of 5 million hectares.
Yeah, there's that bloody expression, there's особо охраняемые природные территории. This statement would be so much easier if that was the only hint they gave you at the start, just to say, okay, an особо охраняемая природная территория is a nature reserve. That would already make your job so much easier throughout this whole statement. But you'll know next time. Now when you come to doing a biodiversity statement, you'll have that, hopefully.
We've already created 14 of these, an area of just over 4 million hectares.
And there's one great way of getting out of it. Did you notice what she did there? So we've already created, okay, уже создано 14 особо, blah, 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 охраняемых природных. So she's just turned that, we've already created 14 of these. Brilliant. You know, they were just talking about them in the previous sentence. Make your life easier. Just say of these. You know, the speaker will understand exactly what you're talking about. You don't need to repeat word for word, you know, the exact same thing like the Russian does. Provided it's clear from what you've said, what you're referring to, then you don't need to make the repetition.
Remain convinced that the adopted and planned measures will ensure the preservation of ecosystems while also promoting ecotourism, with an increase in the number of visitors to natural areas up to 10 million visitors.
Okay, just this little bit here, the принятие и запланирование меры. I think she said like planned and adopted measures, which is perfectly right. I think you could just get away with saying, if you wanted, past and future measures, because that's essentially what it means, isn't it? The принятия have already been adopted in the past. Запланирование are those that are coming in the future. So, you know, if you were struggling, you know, if you were running behind, yeah, you could just say past and future measures. And then, just towards the end of that sentence, again, the посетители природных объектов, she says areas for объекты, which I guess is all right. Again, I think we might refer to, when it comes to nature, places of natural interest, we might refer to them as sites, natural sites. Again, it's up to you, maybe. I mean, it's not a big deal. Just have something that sounds relatively accurate.
This year, we published a new list of animal species included in the Red Book of the Russian Federation.
Okay, so important again when you're talking about animals, видов, species, very important word. Now, the Красная книга Российской Федерации, so I had to look that up. It's called the Red Data Book, is the official name of it. You can apparently call it the Red Book, and it contains a sort of breakdown of endangered species, species that are no longer endangered. Yeah, it's basically a sort of compendium of animals in the Russian Federation.
A third of which are newly included types of fauna, and this guarantees their protection at a state level. Over 100 species have been removed from the Red Book as their situation has improved.
Now, just one little word I wanted to mention here. It's not specifically an environmental word. It's that исключены из Красной книги. I think she said have been taken out of the Red Book. So the word I was going to suggest here is delisted. Now, why do I raise this? This is sort of overlaps with vocabulary that's used in other areas in Russian, okay? Specifically, I'm thinking of lists of terrorist entities, okay? Sanctions lists. And on sanctions lists, whenever there's a meeting then they talk about sanctions lists, they talk about individuals or organizations being listed and delisted. Okay, those are the two set expressions that they use. So I'm saying that here you could quite easily, for исключены из Красной книги, you could say delisted, because it is basically a list of animals. So just take note of that word. It's quite a useful word to have. I mean, I'm sure you don't use it very often in everyday speech in English, to delist, but it's a perfectly legitimate word to use in the context of politics, you know?
Practice shows that well thought out measures to protect rare biological species yield positive results.
Okay, продуманные мероприятия. So she's gone with well thought out measures. It's not bad. I mean, it's a bit of a mouthful. I'm wondering if you could just say sound measures. in English might do the job for you. Again, it's one of those cases where you know exactly what it means. It's just the challenge is to find a snappy solution to it. Well thought out is very specific, maybe more specific sounding than sound. Sound is a bit more general, but sound's quicker to say as well, isn't it? So it's up to you. It's up to you. And here we are again. Сохранение редких биологических видов. So again, here you want your sort of safety word to be protecting rare biological species. You know, if you say maintain here, it doesn't sound right in English, does it? Annoyingly, to maintain rare biological species. And that's the annoying thing, because as I say, usually my sort of go-to word for сохранение in any other context is maintain. But just here, it just doesn't quite fit as well. So here, yeah, in the context of the environment, it looks like when you hear сохранение, your first port of call should be protect. And I like what she's done. Дают положительный результат. Yield. That's a very nice word. Much more interesting than just give. And okay, now prepare yourselves now for this list of animals in Russia. Here we go.
In recent years, we have successfully brought about population growth of the Amur tiger, the far eastern leopard, the snow leopard, the polar bear, the bison and falcon.
Okay, now I'm going to admit to you that when I heard this list of animals, it scared me. Okay, I was really all at sea, just trying to hang on for anything. I mean, okay, so he talks about the Amurskого tigra. I think I'd never heard of the thing. It's funny. I'm going to show you something. So while I was desperately flailing around trying to find the name of any Russian tiger I could think of, I think I said like the Siberian tiger. I've heard of those. So literally the day after I'd listened to the text the first time, so my kids they get these sort of magazines delivered sometimes. The next day I see this. Okay, this tiger gets a new hit. There he is. Right, turn the page. Turn the page, and it says, a very rare operation took place on the 27th of January at Brookfield Zoo in the United States. Malena, an Amur tiger, received a new hip. It was made especially for her. Isn't that nice? Malena. Maybe if my son had given me that the day before, a couple of days before, I wouldn't have been in such trouble. And then the other magazine, look at this. How many Amur tigers do you have at the safari park? Ian Turner, Longleat Safari Park. I think that's meant to be really good that in England. At Longleat, we have 4 Amur tigers, a male and female and their 2 cubs. The Amur tiger is the largest of the big cats. It can weigh up to 300 kilograms, measure more than 3 meters in length. There are only around 500 in the wild, and ours are part of an international breeding program. The most endangered big cat in the world is probably the Amur leopard, as there are only about 60 in the wild. So now I'm a bloody expert on the Amur tiger, I tell you. So apparently this is all the Amur tigers are all the trend apparently among the kids at school. So that's what the Amurski tiger is, Amur tiger. Then I had to look these up as well. Переднеазиатский leopard is apparently the Persian leopard. Дальневосточный leopard is the Far Eastern leopard. I think I got that when I think I was able to piece those two together, or at least the Far Eastern leopard. Then the Снежного барса, that is apparently a snow leopard. I think I skipped that one. Белого медведя, I think I got that, the polar bear. Zubra, I didn't know that. That's a bison, apparently. And Sakalini, I knew that was falcon. So the question is, what do you do? What do you do, Roland, when you get a list of all these animals and you don't know hardly you hardly know any of them? How do you get out of it? And the answer is you just have to. Sometimes you just have to wing it and hope for the best. Because obviously you can't say nothing because he's naming different kinds of animals, and so you just try and clutch. You try and clutch onto something. Like I say, the Siberian tiger, Far East leopard. Just try and get what you can and hope for the best. Sometimes it literally there's nothing else you can do. Okay. But just take comfort from the fact that there we go. Even me, I've been working for these organizations for like 10 years, and then suddenly being hit with these animals, really tough, really tough.
Preventing the extinction of flora and fauna and ensuring an ecological balance require a comprehensive approach and harmonised efforts in all other areas of environmental protection too, and in sustainable development as a whole.
Okay, again, so this is another word, vymieranie. If you read it or whatever, you'd know exactly what it was about. It's to do with dying, obviously. But it's sometimes to get that specific word that you need in English. I mean, there is only one really right word, extinction. Sometimes that word is not necessarily immediately going to come to you. So again, if you know it's going to be a statement on the environment, on animals, and so on, just run always before you do the statement. Run through your head what the likely vocabulary is going to be. One small thing, обеспечение экологического баланса. So she says ensure a balance. So I guess the collocation, the classic collocation we use in English is to strike a balance. Now here's a word that is an interesting one. Природоохранной деятельности. This природоохрана. So she went with environmental protection. Now the problem with that, that's right. It's right, but it's how many syllables is that? Environmental protection. That's 8 syllables. So I tend with anything to do with природа I tend to go with conservation. I tend to find that's a handy sort of word that can quickly get you out of trouble. Conservation, 4 syllables. It comes, it trips off the tongue much more lightly than environmental protection. So yeah, think about using that, природоохрана, conservation.
As a forest power with over 20% of the world's forest area, Russia attaches particular importance to rational forest management.
Okay, запасов леса. I guess it's 20% of the world's forest. She sort of paraphrases. She almost goes around zapas and just says contains 20% of the world's forest. I guess if you want to get that idea of zapas in, you could talk about forest coverage. And then лесным хозяйством. So this is forest management. And also just to go about уделяет особое значение, so attaches great importance. This is, again, it's a synonym. What do we have at the start? Придает большое значение, уделяет особое значение, whatever, sets great store by, attaches great importance. Prioritize. When in doubt, when there's a problem, just resort to prioritize. You can get away with it here. Russia prioritizes rational, sustainable forest management.
As well as measures to adapt to the negative effects of climate change and the sustainable development of the country's water system, based on the Basin principle of water resource management, including in a transboundary context.
So again, here they go again, this complex. Водного комплекса страны. She's gone with the water system. Again, I think you could probably say the country's water complex. So I think both are fine. What she said, the country's water system, or again the water complex. I don't think they would if they heard you saying complex. I don't think they would be too fussed about it. I think they'd be okay with that. And then the Basin principle, Басейново принципа, управления водными ресурсами, the Basin principle of water resource management. So there's these meetings they have especially meetings sometimes especially devoted to the issue of water. I mean, it's a big deal actually, the whole issue of water resources. I think I was in a conference maybe 3 years ago, back in the good old days, in none other than in Astana in Kazakhstan, which is now no longer Astana, by the way. It's called Nur-Sultan, and that was a big summit on the issue of water resources. And I remember that one of the key ideas there was the whole idea of transboundary water resources. That's the sort of buzz phrase. This водными ресурсами, в том числе в трансграничном контексте. They talk about transboundary as opposed to, maybe you'd think they should say transborder, but transboundary is the sort of official terminology, and it just means that same thing, waterways that lie across, lakes, whatever it be, two or sometimes even more countries. And in fact, one of the big things at the moment is that you have a string of what are called river basin commissions of these countries that lie around given waterways, and there's a whole organization trying to manage how those resources are, the income from those resources is distributed and so on. Some of the best known ones, you have the Lake Chad Basin Commission, you have the Danube Commission. I'm just looking through a list here. And there's the Niger Delta Commission, the Mano River Union, the Mekong River Commission. You have the Great Lakes Commission. The Niger Basin Authority. So the point is that these basin commissions, they are players. They're quite key players in politics these days, and so you will hear reference to them, in certain contexts.
We'd like to emphasize the role of indigenous and minority peoples.
Now this is a famous sort of Russian little phrase, the коренных и малочисленных народов, okay, who are basically the indigenous peoples of Russia. So this, as I say, this wording can throw people if you're not used to hearing it a lot, and when they suddenly refer to these various indigenous peoples, you just that whole construction, коренных малочисленных народов. Now, according to Wikipedia, the official translation for this appears to be the minor indigenous peoples of Russia, and so this includes, there's a whole string of indigenous groups in Russia that are listed. There's an official list of them. You see, I'll just give you the flavor. We've got Alutors, Chukchis, Dolgans, Koryaks, Sami. I've heard of the Sami. Evenks, Khantis, Teleuts, Negidals, Taz, Chelkans, Soyots, Tubalars. There is a whole string of these minor indigenous peoples. So just a phrase to be wary of, and a phrase I think you can just get. I think you can just say just indigenous peoples. I don't think you just, when you hear that malochislenik, don't worry about it. Okay, the minor, the small numbered, little. You have these images of little, and that's fine.
Their traditional experience and knowledge in the field of the sustainable use of natural resources are particularly necessary within the framework of local and regional efforts.
Okay, this is like I was saying for Priroda Hrana earlier on. This is again another sort of big chunky portmanteau word in Russian. Природа пользования, which so Erin went with use of natural resources, sustainable use of natural resources, which is certainly a good try. And then I looked it up to see if there was a snappier alternative. So I found environmental management or conservation again. So there's nothing there's nothing particularly satisfactory of that. You've just got to find one that you're vaguely happy with. Environmental, if you're going to go with conservation for Priroda Hrana and to distinguish it, Priroda Polzovan is something slightly different, obviously. Maybe you want environmental management, maybe eco-management. Can you just get away with saying that? Eco-management? I think it'd be worth a try. I'd be up for it. I would say that, eco-management. Востребованный, she says in demand, which is perfectly good. I like for востребованный, I'd like to say relevant. I find that's often slightly more natural sounding in English.
Finally, the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity is one of the most important areas of international environmental cooperation.
Okay, so here comes out this our old friend Сохранение. Сохранение, again, биоразнообразие. So she's gone with conserving. It's fun. I don't think in English we use conserve all that often. Conservation, yeah, that's good. But conserve as a word doesn't sound quite right. It's okay. So again, the safest option here would probably be protecting. That's probably be the most, the closest fit. Protecting biodiversity. You could get away with maintaining biodiversity as well, but once again, I think protection is the word to go for. Одно из важнейших направлений. It's a priority, isn't it? Again, if you're stuck, you're trying to think that one of the most important areas, you're trying to think of this, you're trying to think of 2 or 3 words like to match the Russian. Again, in English, you don't need to sometimes. You just say priority.
It must be implemented on a non-discriminatory basis, building on existing international legal architecture and universally accepted, credible scientific evidence.
I like how she's gone in this little section. С опорой на существующую международную правовую архитектуру. She said building on. It's a good sort of alternative. I tend to often just say based on. So this is another string to your bow, when you hear sapore, building on. I like that, it's good.
The future global framework for biodiversity for the post-2020 period should be an effective targeted complement rather than a replacement of multilateral environmental instruments.
One sort of shortcut you could do here. Okay, so на период после 2020 года, you could just say post-2020, the future global framework program for biodiversity post-2020, rather than having to say for the period after 2020. Адресным дополнением. Адресный is often like targeted, like a targeted. So she said complement or supplement is maybe slightly better. Or as she did, you could actually just skip addressing. I mean, the effect by saying effective, an effective complement, that effective almost, or it sums up the idea of адресным. А не заменой многосторонних instrumentов. So not a replacement, not a substitute for, is another alternative.
Its provisions must reflect a common vision amongst countries. It must respond to today's realities and contribute to the implementation of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
I like what she's done. So instead of saying ważne żeby jej instrumentari, rather than just saying, as I think I probably did, it is important, blah, 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 she's just taken that ważno away and she said, okay, the provisions must reflect the general vision of countries. So that's, it's another good little trick to be aware of. You don't just have, if something's ważno, then it's probably going to be a must in English. The only thing I would perhaps disagree, so for instrumentari, she's talked about the provisions of this global framework program. Well, I think it's a bit more general than the provisions. I think I said it's the tools. I guess you could also say it's instruments, perhaps. You could just say it's instruments. 'Cause I think provisions sort of makes you think of specifically of the document itself, where I think the idea that he wants to get across is a bit more general than just specifically the document. And then this, повестка дня ООН в области устойчивого развития на период до 2030 года. This is a classic case where you can just say the UN Sustainable Development Agenda post 2030, or even if you're really struggling, if you're like behind, struggling to keep up, you could probably get away with just the 2030 agenda and stop. Ideally, you probably want to say the sustainable development, but I think you could be forgiven if you were falling behind and was just saying Agenda 2030. You could get away with it.
Taking into account not only environmental aspects but also socio-economic ones, including the primary goal of eradicating poverty.
And here, I hate to be boring again, включая главную задачу по искоренению нищеты в мире, because she's gone with the primary goal, I think she said. Again, you could just say the priority, the priority of eradicating poverty in the world. I'm not saying you should always use priority. Obviously, you want to jazz up your output as much as you can. But it's funny how there are so many of these expressions in Russian, especially, that when you just sort of look at it, when you just sort of peel back all the fancy words, they just boil down to being a priority.
The document must respect state sovereignty over their natural resources and economic activity, taking into account lessons learned, national priorities and specificities.
Okay, I like what she's done here with nakopленный опыт. She said lessons learned. That's a very good solution there. I mean, maybe the automatic reaction you're going to get when you hear nakopленный опыt is experience gained, which would be fine. I think that's why I said experience gained. But that's such a classic sort of cliche again. It sounds very smooth in this context. Or a synonym of course, lessons learned is best practice. Lessons learned, best practice, they're pretty much interchangeable. And they're always very good, remember those two expressions.
Attention should be granted to the needs of countries in special situations, namely least developed countries, landlocked countries, and small island developing states.
Okay, there's an important little list here of classifications of countries. So, najmniej развитые страны, the least developed countries, okay? The LDCs. You could probably just say the LDCs. That's an acronym that gets used all the time. You probably don't even need to go least developed countries. Государства, не имеющие выхода к морю. Okay, those are the landlocked countries. That's the set expression for those. I mean, they're states. Literally in Russian, it means states without access to the sea. And I think in French it's pays sans littoral, without countries without a coastline. So fortunately in English you can just do it in 2 words, landlocked countries. And then finally this также малые островные развивающиеся государства. So those are the small island developing states, the SIDS. So again, they're referred to quite a lot in UN circles. You could probably just get away with saying the LDCs, the landlocked countries, and the SIDS, and everyone would know what you were talking about.
It is important that the language of the global framework is unambiguous, agreed upon at an intergovernmental level, consistent with UN practice, and also understandable to the general public.
Okay, so for однозначно, this is an important word. Often all the Russians use this, однозначно, they talk about однозначное мнение on something. So she's gone with unambiguous. I often go with categorical. Now, there's a reason I go with categorical as over unambiguous, even though both are right, and I'll tell you what that is. So when you talk about something, if they say, and they often say that something is неоднозначно. Okay, so that не, in my head, the first thing it triggers is like something, the equivalent in English, which is un. Okay? But if you hear неоднозначно and then say unambiguous, you see that could lead you into a horrific contresens if if they say something that's неоднозначный and then you go into unambiguous. That's obviously a complete opposite meaning. So to play safe, what I tend to do is, so when it's when it's однозначный, I say categorical. And when it's неоднозначно, I'll say something like unclear. Okay, so I'll have that не, I find an English word which has that un, but that will give me the right meaning. So that's just for my own comfort, all right? So unambiguous and ambiguous are perfectly right, but you've got to make sure that the неоднозначно goes into ambiguous and the однозначно is unambiguous. That element confuses me slightly, you see. So I play safe, I go for однозначно, I say categorical, неоднозначно, I just say unclear. But it's it's sort of personal taste. If it doesn't confuse you, then fine. And then согласование на межправительственном уровне формулировки. This is a bit of one of these Russian gerunds. Where the adjective and it's the noun it's describing, are sort of divided by this big stuff bit in the middle, the на межправительственном уровне. So I think you could say, based on categorical, intergovernmentally agreed wording, I think might be the easiest solution here. Otherwise, you have to wait for the formulirovka right at the end. You have to, based on categorical wording, agreed at intergovernmental level. I think you can just sort of compress this to categorical, intergovernmentally agreed wording. I think that would be fine. And then соответствовал практике ООН. This is good how she says consistent with UN practice, in line with UN practice, whatever you prefer.
This will best ensure it is followed up by all stakeholders.
Последующее выполнение. I think a good solution for that would be follow-up. This will best enable the follow-up by, as Erin says, for заинтересованными сторонами, stakeholders. Okay, so последующая things like последующая деятельность, последующее выполнение. So follow-up is a good solution to have up your sleeve for that.
In conclusion, I am confident that this summit will be an important milestone in the preparations for the 15th session of the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity.
Okay, and that's it. So by the way, yeah, uwierność, confidence. I'm a bit of a fan of confidence when I hear uwierność as opposed to certainty. I like to go with conference. Okay, so that's a very interesting text. Really does introduce a lot of new elements that we certainly haven't looked at before in in my tutorials. And I tell you what, I've learned a great deal from this text myself, so that's a really good one to have. It's good to just sort of sometimes in these languages to do, especially for Russian, do it from a subject that you don't come across as frequently, say in your work, because at some point you will be called upon to do stuff like this, and you need to have a sort of and you need to have a sort of reservoir of words to be able to draw on. Okay, so with that, time for Roland's magic moments. So, welcome to everyone's favorite part of the show, Roland's magic moments. So, what's Roland got in store for you today for his magic moments? Well, to no one's great surprise, they're going to be fairly environmentally, wildlife biased on this occasion. Just to take advantage of this opportunity that we have with this text. So, in third place, I've decided to go for this set of words that the Russians use. You know how they refer to the заповедники, the заказники, the особо охраняемые природные территории, etc., etc. So just remember, if you know something to do with the environments coming up with wildlife, reserve, refuge, sanctuary, shelter as well, I guess. Yeah, go for all four of them. RRSS. Remember those, because they'll get you out of a lot of trouble. And again, they're not words that will immediately spring to, they might not immediately spring to mind unless you've deliberately set out before the meeting to try and draw them in from somewhere. Okay, and then Roland's magic moment, the silver medal winner today, the silver medal winner. Again, another couple of sets of expressions. Extinction and endangered species. Okay, so вымирание, extinction, endangered species. Remember, what the Russians say for this, исчезающие виды. Because if you just hear it like that, you might think, oh, disappearing species. So obviously, that's how they say endangered species. And finally, the gold medal winner, Roland's magic moment of the day. Who else is it going to be than our furry friend, the Amur tiger? And I'm going to put a little cheeky picture of him up. Okay. What a cuddly little fellow, eh? Yes. So the Amur tiger, and while you're at it, you may as well just remember, you've got your Far Eastern leopards, you've got your Persian leopards. Learn your Russian animals, and the same applies to me too. So there you have the Amur tiger wins a gold medal, the magic moment of the day. Well, it brings us to the end of another show. If you've enjoyed it, please do smash the thumbs up button. Also, if you haven't subscribed already, please feel free to do so. Also, yes, on LinkedIn, if you're not yet following me on LinkedIn, make sure you get over there, because there's a lot of good stuff happening on my LinkedIn account. Go especially to the Interpretation Station LinkedIn account, and I've just set up a group, the Interpretation Station group, and that is going to act as my repository my archives for all those one-page annotated texts that I put up, okay? So get over there, become a member of the Interpretation Station LinkedIn group, and you'll have full, free, complete access to all those texts, which I'm going to be putting out in a big way, and I'm going to be putting out a lot more of the shorter videos as well. I'm going to be focusing more now on the short ones, on the 10-minute videos, the commentaries, and I'll probably come out, these tutorials are probably going to be like every 2 weeks now. That's my rough plan. But anyway, get over to the LinkedIn page, become a member, sign up the Interpretation Stage page, and that is, I think that's it for today. Which, again, all I need to do now, close the meeting, and say that episode which leaves me all and with that, all that's left for me to say is that episode 23 of the Interpretation Station is adjourned. See you next time.
The train is now leaving the Interpretation Station. We hope you enjoyed your visit. Until next time.